Okay, so we'll get started then, because it's 4 o'clock and we really do have a packed agenda. We had a run through yesterday and we went severely over time, but we hope that this session is going to be really helpful to you. We'll introduce ourselves in a moment, and really the reason we did this, and the stats prove it for themselves. We had a SurveyMonkey poll, and just looking at some of those stats from a sample of you, it was really quite alarming that only 9% of you felt confident that of your assessment point 1, which really goes to show why we need this session. And also that only 40% of you really knew how to use that non-contact time. And also just over 40% knew about the evidence towards the standards. Where you were a little bit more confident are things like how to use your TA, managing behaviour in the classroom, and all of that's fantastic. But the most alarming statistic, so we will really make sure we cover that one, is that only 9% of you knew what to do in a situation where something goes wrong. So we're really going to make sure we cover that in particular. Okay, right, let's get started then. And we're going to first of all introduce ourselves. So before I introduce myself, we'll start with James. James.
Oh, thanks. Back it over to me. So my name's James Pearce. I am a Year 4 class teacher, head of year, and an NQT about 7 years ago now. The numbers are totting up as we carry on over time. I have worked alongside a number of NQTs, SCIT students and VA students, and used to attend Kingston University, where Jean was my maths lecturer, which is how I know her, and Dharmini, I work with her as well. So yes, a good team behind the scenes, but yeah, lots of different roles in school. Okay,
Claire.
Hello, I'm Claire. I've been teaching for quite a long time now. I'm very experienced with being an NQT induction tutor. I'm also an education consultant, and I also teach Year 6, but have taught across primary age range.
And Dharmini?
So my name is Dharmini Fernando, and just like James said, I studied alongside James at Kingston University, where we were lucky to meet Jean, and I was also lucky enough to work with Claire at my previous school. At the moment, I'm a Year 6 teacher, maths lead. I've done student mentoring. I will be continuing to do student mentoring at the school. Just applied for the MPQSL, which will be really interesting to see this year.
That's great. And my name is Jean Knapp, and I have managed NQTs for Hillingdon, where I came across Claire, and then also the ITT route, that trajectory that goes from ITT into NQT. And obviously a lot of the work I do now with maths is also supporting NQTs as well. Right, we're really excited to get started. These were our aims of the session, and as I said, the stats that we gave from the SurveyMonkey really go to prove the importance of these aims, and we'll hopefully get through them in the session. So let's go with transition point 1. This is what you will be covering. It really is a term of 2 halves, but the same process will be repeated in those 2 halves. This idea that certainly within the first 3 weeks of being in school, you will be observed. And also after that observation, there will be a review meeting, and already in place, there should be some sort of action plan, activities that you will encounter and do within your school. You may have had some of that already set up over the summer. Some sort of induction has already taken place. It would really depend whether you're going to be a September start or whether you started much earlier in the summer. And then in the second half, the same thing will happen. Another observation, another review meeting. But as we'll talk about later, this doesn't mean this is your only meeting, your only opportunity to discuss things, your only way of showing evidence towards your action plan. The first observation is often a general observation. You could be observed just to see what you are like in something that you feel confident in teaching. It's only a little bit later that whoever's observing you may want to see something specific that may have been born out of the first observation. And it's out of that final observation of the term that a report is put together. And then you move into the next term. But it's really, that's the overview. Does any of you want to come in and say anything extra to that? Dharmini, Clare or James?
I would just say that as you're working towards that second observation, all the things that you do are building up towards that point. So everything that you're observed in, it might not be formal observations, but other things where you've had feedback will help to support that end point of the first term.
Yes, I think that's a really good point that Clare has made, and we'll talk about this later. Your evidence base is not simply an observation. The other thing that many NQTs are not aware of is if it doesn't go so well in your first observation, you are actually allowed to say, well, you know, I wonder if we could do this another day. Could I have another go at doing this? Now, a lot of NQTs are not aware of that, but you are actually allowed to do that. So it's something worth bearing in mind. Some of you will be more than happy and relieved to get it out of the way. The idea of having a second one might not be the thing that you want, but it's there as an option. Okay, so this is your role, because everyone has a role in school towards your induction. Your mentor, your head teacher, but you have a role and a responsibility to achieving these standards. So it's about you keeping records. But I often think one of the most important records is that little notebook. You're keeping notes and things people have said to you, maybe in the corridor, things that have happened that maybe your mentor would not have seen, that can all add up as an evidence base towards that final point. So hopefully this slide will be helpful. By the way, we can make sure all these slides get to you so that you will have a copy of them, including some handouts we think are going to be helpful. So there'll be resources attached to this. Do you want to say anything with regards to records that NQTs must take, particularly your own experience of this?
I would just say that it's something that the school I was in was doing, and they were encouraging teachers and NQTs to video themselves. Now, I wasn't really a big fan of it because I just don't like watching myself, let alone listening to myself. So, but it became a really, really good tool, because not only do you see yourself and you see your posture, which I think some people are not aware of, and how you come across, you also get to listen to the tone that you use. And for me, when I did it, I just looked at it and I thought, oh my God, I didn't think I sounded this way. I didn't realize I said this particular word so many times while speaking. So it was something that I could self-reflect. I did it for myself. I did it for my own self-review, and it really did help in the long run.
That's a really good point. Yes, we often don't pick up on those things about ourselves. It's only when we're having to do that painful job of analysing ourselves after that moment. Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, can I just add on to that, Jean? I think it's really important to think about the record keeping side of things. You know, we've got that lovely list there in front of us, all the key things that you need to get in. But remember, it's not a tick list, and it is lots of opportunities to reflect, review. And actually, although this is the part of the NQT, and we said about this yesterday, the other day, you know, although it is the part of the NQT, there's that relationship with your mentor and your assessor as well. So some of these tasks you will do, you know, with your mentor, and you will get from that lots of discussions, lots of action points, and a good opportunity to reflect and to keep that progress over the year. So don't see it as a tick list. see it as opportunities to discuss, to develop, to grow, and to make the most of the opportunity.
That's great.
And from a tutor's point of view, really, I would say that if you're constantly looking at the standards, if you have some sort of record of each of the standards and then you just jot bullet points down as you go, then you're not having to worry about producing masses of things, but it could just be a bullet point that says about how you've had a meeting with someone, a subject lead, for example. So all of those little bits that can actually inform those assessment points are really, really useful, because it gives you things to talk about when you do meet for your assessment meetings and with your tutor if you have the opportunity before that.
That's a really good point as well. This idea that if you do it as you go, you're not going to have all this huge workload or having to look at things that have already passed and you're having to rack your brain about what happened. The other thing is, if you do that, you'll be able to see what you don't have so much evidence towards and then work towards creating an evidence base for that too. Okay. Helpful records then. So it's not just what's captured in the lesson, as we've already said. So it could be review meeting notes, it could be informal meeting notes, just someone that you've caught down the corridor asking about an approach to something you're going to teach next week. Keeping a little learning log, a reflection. Now these could only be really little notes. It's not about increasing your workload, but just jotting things down that might have worked or how you might change something. Initial thoughts and feelings. I always think it's worth getting that down on the day you get that job and seeing how things change as the weeks roll on. And this is so important. When we had a chat about this, by the way, we all agreed on this sort of thing about keeping great feedback. Because one of us, if we were to say now, all of us, that teaching every single day is perfect and you're going to be happy every single day, we would be lying. But most days are amazing. But everyone is going to get that day that is going to be difficult for them. So what you do is you open up that little folder that's got great feedback and you have a good read of it and you remind yourself why you are here. You've already passed your teaching QTS and that says a lot. It means you're great enough already to stand in front of those children. But progressing towards becoming a fully qualified teacher of your induction year, keep that great feedback. Years and years on, and I'm not going to say how many, but I still keep that feedback because it's worth going back to, and it will ground you and remind you that what you are doing is right. Anything else you want to say?
Just the example that I gave below. So it's like we said, it's not all just in a lesson. There are other opportunities that will help you achieve those standards. So for example, if your lesson about fractions didn't go to plan, you can make arrangements to observe another class teacher, deliver this lesson, and then reteach it with the changes, which will promote your children's knowledge and understanding. That will then count towards, I put down there standard 5, which was adapting your teaching to respond to the strengths and needs of all your pupils. I know that some of the schools have got expert teachers now, which are available for NQTs to go and watch and learn from. So there again, it doesn't all have to, your evidence doesn't all have to come from within that one observed lesson.
Yeah. The other thing is that, as you know, in your teaching experience, you may have come across watching someone where you saw a lesson, you thought, I really wouldn't do it that way. And that doesn't matter, because whether the lesson was amazing or not so good, there's always something to learn from it. To think about, well, I actually wouldn't do it that way, but I'll do it this way instead. That might work. So, of course, we want to go and see amazing, outstanding teaching. But when things don't go as well, even for outstanding teachers, that's also reassuring to us that things don't always go perfectly for everyone, and they don't. It's not going to be like that. Children are a little bit like, animals in a way. We cannot predict sometimes what they're going to say, how things are going to go, and so we have to be very careful about that. Okay, out of the classroom affects what's in the classroom as well. So this is really, I think, the one most single thing, particularly at ITT, is that you cannot be a shrinking violet. You really have to be out there and proactive. Even if you're not that person, you have to somehow try and be that person. And always asking for help, and don't see that as a sign of weakness. We've all been there, and it doesn't matter what level of experience you are, you will continue to ask for help because you'll never stop learning. But really thinking about your policies in the school, becoming familiar with them, particularly at this stage, things such as well-being is a big one, safeguarding, making sure you really do know those, and that you are making sure you apply them to what you are doing within the classroom, and establishing relationships with staff and pupils. I often think if you've got a great relationship with other members of staff, on your bad days, it really helps. It's really important. I often find that your staff, you know, it's so important that you establish those relationships, and they make a job just as much as the wonderful children that you'll stand in front of. And then also to observe teachers. You know, it doesn't matter what level of experience you are. You could be the most experienced teacher ever, but observing someone is the most amazing thing. And here's something that I will tell you, and I know Claire will also probably say this too, because actually I've heard her say this, that very experienced teachers are going to probably come into your classroom and watch the lessons. Don't think for a minute you can't teach them anything. We pinch your ideas, because that is actually why you are also part of the school, is to bring in some amazing fresh new ideas. So we learn from you as much as you learn from us, and you must also remember that, so you have something really to give within that lesson. And also to really just keep reading. This might be more relevant in your second year, particularly in the early careers framework, your second year of this pathway. You might want to engage a little bit more in research. Schools are becoming more research led, but if you want to try something out, it's nice if it has a research underpinning. Do you want to add anything more to that, Dharmini, Claire, or James?
I think if you, as an NQT, you've come out from having, whichever route you've come from, you've had different experiences. You often get that up-to-date research. So when whoever comes in to see you, we do learn things, and often we share them with other people as well. So you're not also helping us, but we're also passing it on, and that's one of the best things about teaching, is that we often gather everything from everyone else and then use it and pass it on.
Now, I'm also aware some people have popped a few things in the chat, so hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those at the end, and if not, if there's some remaining, I will make sure that we pop them in an email, some of the responses. Okay, so the teaching, the importance of risk-taking experimentation. If you want to try something out for the first time, I think it's always worth doing that. You know, the teachers that are going to just keep trying something new and look towards the things that work are often our most effective teachers. But I think it's always worth telling the observer, telling the children that, hey, I'm trying this for the first time. It might not work, but I want your feedback on this. What do you think? And to have this an experimentation. I know of schools that have once a month a sort of risk-taking, try something out observation in a month, where it's not about delivering the perfect lesson, it's just about experimentation, and that's so important to your practice. But also to think about whatever lesson you do, it's not about the resource, it's not about whether it's all singing or dancing. The most important point is, what do they need to learn? how am I going to get them there? So how are they going to actually learn this? And also, not just learn this at the end of the lesson, because most children remember what they're told by the end of the lesson. But how are they going to actually learn that by the end of the week, by the end of the month, by the end of the year? Because our new knowledge curriculum is about success over long-term learning. That is really thinking about long-term learning. And I think we get confused by that in tests. Tests are measuring progress, but it's a snapshot of that time. Does that child actually know that knowledge that's being taught in that test a year later? Because that is about learning, and learning and progress are two very different things. So how does one lesson demonstrate that teaching and learning? Well, it can't demonstrate long-term learning. We have to watch you long-term to be able to get that, but it will give us a sense of the trajectory that the children are on, the pathway that they are on. And there is some research out there, but it would depend on the school, that you have different observers. So they're all bringing something different to your experience as well. I think the most important thing, particularly with COVID, is that, you know, we're in this comfortable feeling that maybe if we had year 4, that if we just read the year 4 objectives, then we'll know what to cover. But they may have lost something. They may have gained something, but they may have lost something within that time they've been off school. So I think it's really important that there is some prior learning found. And we can do that through activities such as quizzing or brain dump, where we ask children to write down everything they remember about something, for example. So you need some retrieval activities so you can find out what they know. And once you know that, you can successfully plan for their next steps. And that may well be, if I was in year 4, it may still be in year 3. And I know some schools actually who are going to look at some year 3 or the previous year material before they start moving on in our particular situation we're in now. Anything else?
Yeah, I'd like to just add on back to the risk-taking experimentation. One of the bits of NQT feedback that I remember that really has stuck with me over the years was, I think it was my first spring observation, and I went for a risk and it went completely wrong. And I remember before that one thinking, you know, why would I be doing this? Why am I taking the risk? Why am I not playing it safe in front of my assessor? But the feedback from that was so useful because, you know, I sat down with her and she said, do you know what, it's great you took a risk, and now that you've gone wrong, we can discuss it, we can reflect on it. So not only is it an opportunity for you to break the mold, and I know that sometimes, you know, actually you can play safe and simple in an observation, but remember that taking the risk does open you up to a better opportunity to get help, to get support, to get opinions from other teachers. And it is that opportunity to have an expert teacher in the classroom with you and giving that one-to-one feedback on what you're doing. So it's useful to do in that way as well.
Yeah.
And very often that discussion you have then allows you to learn from that. And that's what you want to see. You want to see someone who can see, oh yeah, that didn't really go very well. I know it didn't, but this is what I would do if I did it again. So it's about that constant reflection on what you've delivered.
The only other point I would make is about the different observers, which I think is really important, and I support the research that goes with it, because if you, for example, if you have an induction tutor and they might be slightly set in their ways and they see it from their point, it's good to have another set of eyes come in there, a fresh set of eyes, watch you teach a different lesson, and just get the feedback from a different person and their viewpoint, and see if you can collate that sort of information and, you know, use it for your standards points. Yeah,
I agree with that. And the idea is that if something doesn't go right as well, it doesn't mean it's going to not go right forever. Everything we ever introduce in the classroom needs embedding, and that's never going to happen in just one lesson. So also think about that too. So if it was something new you wanted to try, how about just try it out that week, that not that particular idea, but it might be a pedagogical approach, and you might want to try that throughout the week before the actual lesson that's observed happens. So with pedagogical approaches you can do that, but if it was an actual, obviously, handout, they've really got to see it for the first time. Okay, now this came from a fantastic idea from Ross McGill and his website. If you're not aware of it, I'd highly recommend it, called Teacher Toolkit. And he talked about this idea of learning walk yourself. Now, you all should know what a learning walk is. You often get teachers walk around, often in pairs, and they will take in your classroom environment and just maybe be in your classroom for 5 or 10 minutes. It's a very quick process to get a summary of how a certain subject or teaching and learning is in your school. But this idea I thought was wonderful. So with this, you'd set the children an activity that they can be getting on with on their own. And once you've set that activity, you stand back and you pretend you are actually the observer. And you walk around and you have a look at your own displays. You also ask the children questions as if you were the visitor to that classroom. And I've left some of the possible questions below, as you can see here. And these are the sorts of questions they're going to be asked routinely, your class, when they have an observer in, because it's very much focused on the learner and how they are learning things. And this is such a positive, really beneficial activity, and some of the results to this you could add to your evidence base as well, because if something's not working, the children are going to be the first ones to tell you that, and if something is working, of course you want to use it more if they love it so much and it's having a benefit. Dharmini, Claire, James, you want to add to that?
Not only are you learning walking yourself with this activity, but I have to say, because we had Ofsted last year, September, so pre-COVID and everything, but these questions are very, very similar to the deep dive questions that Ofsted asked the children when they were interviewing them. And it is, you know, the same. How do you get your feedback? Do you think you're making progress in class? So not only is this beneficial for you, but you're also sort of prepping for when Ofsted should resume their visits again with us.
Yep.
And I'd also say that what Jean said there is completely right. The children will be your toughest critics and the most honest. And if you do ask them about progress and challenge and things like that, they will tell you. But it's really useful. And actually, you know, you do have 30, depending on how many in your class, you have 30 people sitting there who can give you that insight, and so it's very useful in terms of you changing your practice and thinking about the work that you are setting.
Claire, did you want to say anything, or shall I move on?
Just very quickly, only about if you do ask these type of questions, again, you are rehearsing language and things that the children need. So using those types of vocabulary are really important, because then it doesn't matter who asks them that question, they will understand what they need to do in order to respond. That's
great, thank you. So the planning now that goes into that observation lesson. So let's think about the before. It's really important that you know what the focus is. Now, as I said, for the first one, they might just say, I just want to see you teach something in a subject that you feel super confident with. But the most important thing, whatever that subject is, whatever the focus, is that you absolutely know what those children's prior learning is. So that will require a lesson before your observation lesson where you find out what that is. And that could be using any of those retrieval methods in order to get that. Just as an example, if it was a mathematics lesson, for example, I'd be going straight to diagnostic questions, the website, or White Rose diagnostic questions. And I'd be using some of those quizzes, multiple choice, to really find out what the children do know and don't know, because that will help me plan my lesson so it fits where they are. And it's really got to take that into account. Then the third point has come from a Mary Myatt conference about the curriculum. And this is about the importance of lessons having a purpose. Some children who disengage with education, they wonder what this is all about, and why they're learning something. Why do they need to know that? And I think it's important that we get that across in the first 5 minutes. Why are we learning about this? And it could be it has a real life connection, but not always. It could just be, well, if you don't know this, then you won't know how to do this and this in our next 2 lessons. It could have a connection with the progression that they'll be going on to. And that's the reason why it's so important. So get the purpose in there. The most important thing is about keeping, and I know that James and Dharmini and Claire will have a lot of things to say about this, keeping your learning objective and task manageable. Don't have several learning objectives. All of us know that the best lessons are often the simplest. They might not be the all singing or dancing lessons, but what you have planned for is achievable in that time, rather than just trying to do too much and stressing out that you're never going to do it. It's not humanly possible. Use your additional adults. I'm going to keep that short because I know my other colleagues want to say something about that. And a copy of the lesson plan or any materials for the visitor. And also, and I think this is really helpful, if you know you've worked really hard on something and you want that observer to notice that thing, highlight it or tell them before the lesson. So you're drawing their attention to it. I think sometimes you need that too. Okay, so Claire, Dharmini, James, do you want to say anything about these points, any one of these?
The only thing I would say is, obviously, if we have a learning objective, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to share it with them right at the start of the lesson, because if you did that on every single lesson, it would be quite boring. So you actually want to get a hook in to get them engaged in it before you can share it, or they may even be able to work out what the learning objective is from what they've been doing. So don't think that just that there's a prescriptive way of doing everything. You need to try to engage them, and not always by sharing that learning objective right at the very start. Give them something that interests them, that engages them before you move on.
Yeah. Anyone else want to add anything?
I would just say that the use of additional adults, I found it quite useful to share my plans and thoughts with my LSA at the time, and sort of go through it and sort of see if they had any questions about the lesson. Did they feel comfortable with what I had planned? You know, were there any areas where they might have needed a little bit more support so they can deliver just as well as I'm delivering the lesson, so we sort of work in sync?
Yeah, yeah.
And I'd just say, in terms of the objectives and the tasks achievable, following on from the point you said earlier on, I made that mistake before in one of my NQT observations and just tried to pack way too much in there. And I think at the beginning, sometimes you almost as an NQT can think that to stretch your children, to challenge them, you know, pitch it right and everything, you want to put loads of content in there. But there's nothing better than getting a learning intention or a learning objective and getting into it thoroughly, getting the depth of the lesson, and, you know, seeing that at the end of it instead of just trying to cram too much in.
Some really, really good advice there. The only other thing that's just come to mind is about the use of additional adults. The bit of the lesson, if I were to think about all the lessons I've ever observed, the bit of the lesson that's so tricky to engage other adults within is the bit where the teacher might be scaffolding or modelling. Because quite often you will see lessons where the TA is watching that, but the TA has to be engaged with their group of children or a child all of the time. So it's about making sure they have materials that they can be mimicking the things that you're doing with their group as well, so that they're still teaching whilst you're teaching. I think that's also a really important point.
If I could just build on your point, Jean, in mathematics especially, when the teacher is doing the input, I found it, and I've observed this in different schools, I found it really useful to see how the additional adult was at the front with the teacher at the same time. So the teacher was modeling and explaining, and the additional adult was modeling with different types of resources at the front as well. So they were using cubes, etc. So on, whilst the teacher was talking about the numbers and so forth, so that all the children were able to access the information of the input. And it didn't mean that the adult was just sitting in a corner waiting for the lesson to begin.
Yep.
And
Yep.
similar to that in English, particularly if you're doing like a guided writing task or a shared writing task, what's really nice is to get your TA to lead the conversation. So while you're modelling and writing up on the board, they can be the one that's asking, using lolly sticks, anything that engages the children and keeps the energy high in the lesson, but also empowers your TA to feel like they're part of that and really helping the learning. I mean, you're going to get more from your TA if they feel empowered and positive about their role. And yeah, your observer hopefully will see that, and that goes really well for things like Standard 8.
Mm. Now, I know that some of you might not have a TA, in which case that's not something you have to worry about. But if you do, this is something, and you may have, if you don't have one now, you may have one in the future, more than likely. But that extra adult, the reason why we're putting so much emphasis on it is that they are your responsibility. How that they operate within the classroom is your responsibility. So it's really important you're very clear about what you want them to do. Okay, moving on. During the lesson, I think that I'm going to leave that first point to Claire, because when we went through this, she was fantastic at explaining this. So I'm actually going to leave that one, but the importance of giving children time to, in the second point, to answer questions. We get really uncomfortable in that silence. I think we all do. It doesn't matter how inexperienced or experienced you are, we do. 30 seconds feels like a lifetime, but actually question to answer to response, research tells us it takes 40 seconds for a child to process a question, get an answer, and respond. So make sure if you want to keep them all together with paired talk, that's quite difficult in our current situation, but certainly independent thinking and response, we give them proper adequate amounts of time for questions that demand it. Okay, I'm going to go back to the first one about going off plan. If things don't go to plan, maybe children exceeding or they're not doing as you expected them to, maybe they need more help. So what do we do? I'm going to go to Claire.
I think the key thing to remember is if things aren't going to plan, don't carry on with it, because you just end up in more of a state really, because of panic, because you're thinking, I'm still going through it. I've planned it. I've been up for hours trying to plan the lesson. But the best thing to do is to stop, take a second or so to think about what you're doing and change it. Because if you carry on, you're not going to feel great about it, and the children aren't going to have got what you wanted them to achieve by that lesson. And I think from an observer's point of view, I would rather go in and see somebody who actually recognises that things aren't going right and that they make that decision to change it. So a lot of the time when we're training as teachers, we're often told to think about misconceptions and things like that. So be prepared before to think about, well, if this doesn't go to plan, what can I do that I might use to change it? Sometimes it might need just a very small tweak and it could make a huge difference. So don't be afraid to go away from that plan that you might have spent quite a long time looking at, because the better lessons will be those ones where you can change it and adapt based on the responses you're getting from the children.
Yep. Dharmini or Claire, do you want to, sorry, Dharmini or James, do you want to say anything else to follow up on that?
The only thing I would say for giving the children time to answer the questions is something I learned along the way in my NQT year and further down the line, is that I think it was my NQT year where I wanted to show the my observer that I had an inclusive classroom, and I was asking and I was involving all the children. But then sometimes when I asked children, they just they took too long to answer, I panicked. You know, like you said, 30 seconds felt like hours. I was sweating. I didn't know what to do. And then eventually I learned to say, you know, that's okay. Have a think about it. I'll come back to you, but make sure you go back to that child, you know, because they will sit there and they will have thought about an answer and they will want to give you something back. So it's okay. Let them have a think. Carry on with your lesson. You'll sweat a lot less. There'll be a lot less panic at the front. And yeah, it's just something I had to learn the hard way.
Yeah, sorry, James.
That's what I was going to say. I used a technique that's similar actually, and it's the same thing. If you really want that child to do something, particularly an observation lesson, you're like, come on, you know it's in there. So I used to do the same as that, but I would do give them four children's turns. So I would ask 4 more children. So I'd ask someone else, and I'd say, right, you've got 3 more children now. Ask someone else, 2 more children. So they know it's coming. And usually what you will find is a friend near them will turn around and will like feed them with an answer or try and help them, because all of a sudden it becomes a team against the teacher. But yeah, they're all trying to help each other to get an answer. But yeah, that's quite a good technique too. But yeah, as Dharmini said, you know, you really want the child to get that, and given the time, it's hard, but you know, if you give them the time, they will get there.
That's great advice. Thank you. Okay, next one. Planning after your observation lesson, because there's a lot to be gained of the after. And a really good piece of advice I was given many years ago when I was in Hillingdon was about self-evaluating your own lesson first. So don't rush into a feedback scenario. Ask if you can have just 5 or 10 minutes after lesson, because it's all fresh in your mind, and just jot down what you thought about different bits, because then you can take those notes to your feedback meeting and have something that you can talk from. And quite often the bits and pieces that you've picked up on, your observer may have picked up on as well. And it's just something to start with, something to build on. And I think that's really important. I think the most important thing, and all teachers are guilty of this, even the most outstanding experienced teachers are guilty of this, I will say, is that you may most probably be given 20 brilliant things that happen in that lesson and 1 development point, but you will go home and it will haunt you, that 1 development point. It mustn't. You have to be able to move on from that, and it will be easy to work on it and see it as something that, you know, okay, this is something now I can work on, and to take that feedback, I think. But also after a lesson, observation, it's a stressful scenario. Even if you block that person out, it's a stressful scenario. So I think there was a lovely comment here from Dharmini about, you know, relax, you did your very best. Do you want to add to that, Dharmini? Actually, I'll come to you first.
It's just, I know how it feels. You were just so stressed, you know, after the observation, and you know, it's done. You did your very best, and it's just it's time to reflect and think about all the positives that happened during that observation, so that you can make yourself feel better and you go into your follow-up meeting positively.
Yeah. Any other points?
I'll say one thing, I know we were going to leave questions till the end, but a question's come in on the box I've just noticed, which I think it might be quite useful to look at now.
Okay.
From Kieran, who said, what do you do if half the class doesn't get the lesson? And thinking about what Claire was saying on the last slide about how you know, you need to be flexible and things. Claire, what would you do if you got to the point where half the class, or what would you expect someone to do if half the class really aren't getting the lesson? How would you manage that?
I think I would possibly break them off into different groups, and those children that I'd identified that needed further support, I would bring them, give them further support, while the others went on to complete something that I'd already set for them, because they knew what they were doing. So it's about not having fixed groupings, but it's about moving around and being flexible with the children within the class. because sometimes children that you expect to achieve great things in that lesson, you think they're really going to get it, then don't. So rather than actually saying, well, they're in this group and they're supposed to go off and do this, it's about that constant questioning, constant assessing of where they are and what they've understood, and then moving them as fluidly as you go through the lesson.
Yeah. I also like to look at where that half the class might be making errors, and then quickly make them my own errors and go and put them up on the board and say, I've made some dreadful mistakes. Can you tell me what I've done wrong? And then we'll have a whole big discussion about it. But it is important that you do change track, because remember, let's go back to our first point we made. This is about our children making progress in that lesson, and any barriers to their progress are things like misconceptions, not understanding the work. So anything that you can do to remove those barriers, and sometimes making their errors and misconceptions your own, stopping the class and having a sort of mini plenary where you really discuss those, is a nice way to do that. Now, this might not mean that you get to the end of your lesson plan, so be it. You've got the argument there that if you pursued it, they would never make progress, and it's much better that they make progress on a small part of that than no progress at all, because they walk out of that lesson with a large number of misconceptions that then are going to move into your next lesson, and you really don't want that to happen.
The other thing I've also done is when I've seen a child that has made a mistake or is not getting whatever, I might have spoken to them before and then asked them if they'd be willing to share with the rest of the class what mistake they made. And then if they are, they share the mistake they've made, and then I ask their peers if they can help them, how they would actually go about fixing it or understanding it. So not necessarily always teacher-led, but maybe pupil-to-pupil-led.
Yeah, yeah. And there was a point here about, you know, if 80% get the lesson, 20 don't, that's appropriate level of challenge. Yes, that's what's in the research about that. Yeah. Okay, so moving on, because I've just noticed the time here. Okay, so the next point, hopefully this is going to move along. Term 2, what next? So really making sure that you are addressing your action points. Again, still making sure that not everything you're collecting is from your lesson observations. Researching along the way to see if you can find better ways of doing something. And also making sure you're always aware of what your observation focus is. With 13 minutes to go, I really want to move on to the other resources. Is everyone else who's presenting with me happy to do that?
Go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the really important one. 9% of you only knew what to do when these problems emerge. So we are going to spend about 4 or 5 minutes on this because the vast majority of you really seem to need the help about when problems emerge. I first of all want to be really positive about this and say it's rare. When I used to have to go into schools and we had over 100 NQTs a year come through Hillingdon, I maybe had to visit 1 or 2, and not for the entire term either. So it's a very rare thing. So I'm going to say that first of all, these problems are rare, but when they do emerge, okay, so when they do emerge, I think it's important to first of all note, when did they emerge? Because if you've had a whole term where everyone's saying to you, yes, it's great, your lessons are fabulous, they would have passed, it's good, and they're at least satisfactory, if not better. But then suddenly you get told in the spring term that things are not going well. I think that's important to have that discussion about why have things suddenly changed. So when did they emerge? It's important that the school, because they have a responsibility as much as you do, that they are really transparent with you and tell you straight, really from certainly by the end of autumn, whether things are going well or not. Sometimes with that first observation, you might just want people to settle in. But certainly by the second observation of assessment point 1, you should know where you are, and that should not be a surprise. Additional workload considerations. If you do have problems, and let's say you were running a club, that club should be removed from you straight away, because your focus should be on the classroom and your development points, and anything else would be seen as excessive workload. So additional workload considerations would be taken into account if you're running extra things that are not really required in your first year. And there should be a supportive lesson plan put in place for you, as there would be if you're an experienced member of staff and you were having difficulties. You would have an action plan put in place to support those development points. It's a very supportive process, and it's important that that support is built in for you. So when did it emerge and the support? The very, very worst case scenario I'm going to say now, which is in the statutory guidance, and I would really, Claire's going to talk about this as one of the resources, but it's a document, a legal document that you really must become very familiar with. In the statutory guidance for NQTs, if you, in your final term, you had already some failed lessons and you were into your final term and you were building up to your assessment point 3, and it could be the case that you don't pass your NQT year. If that's the case, there are very serious consequences to that. I don't know anyone who's ever gone through this, by the way. There are very serious consequences though, and obviously not being able to teach is the biggest of all. But if you were in that situation, I know of teachers that have left for term 3, started their term 3 in another school and thrived and done really, really well. And there is no stigma attached to starting an assessment point 3 in another school. I think this is where it's not just about the NQT, but about the school making sure that you are safe and comfortable and happy, because some schools people will thrive and others not. I would like to think most schools are there for students to thrive, but it doesn't always happen that way. But do not think because you might be heading for not passing in your 3rd term that leaving the school is not an option, and to pass in another school would be an option. It certainly would be. And as I said, there would be no stigma attached to that. And I want to make that absolutely clear, but it is extremely rare. I do not know of this happening. Maybe other people do, but don't think about that. But I think it's always important to have in the back of your mind, what can I be doing? And to always be asking for reassurance, how you're getting on, how are you doing? You want to know that all the time, because you don't suddenly want that surprise. And you certainly shouldn't. That's bad practice. Okay, Claire, did you want to add something to that? Because I know particularly you might have something that you want to say from your experiences of working with students.
No, only just really to reiterate the final point you made, that there should be no surprises. So if things aren't going well, you shouldn't come to that final meeting or end of term 2 meeting or whatever, and someone should tell you that you are not on track to pass. If that's the case, then something has gone severely wrong with the process, the whole process. So you should be fully aware if things aren't going right, you should know right from the start. And the action plan really should be very specific. Targets should be very smart targets. They shouldn't be woolly. You should clearly know what you're working towards and how you're going to get there and what support is in place in order to help you get there. And those things on that action plan should keep being referenced. You should keep going back to them. You should keep checking. If somebody's supposed to be doing this with you, then you need to make sure that is happening. and keep following it up so that it doesn't become a situation where you are having to make a decision, an important decision right at the end. And like Jean said as well, I haven't come across anybody that's got to term 3 and not passed, because I have come across people who've had to make the decision whether they need to move on or not and do a term 3 somewhere else. But again, yes, they've gone on and done it somewhere else and got through it. So don't bury your head in the sand almost to think that, oh, it'll all be all right, because you cannot redo. Once you get to the end of term 3, you can't redo your NQT year. That's it. You can't teach anymore. So, you know, really make sure you are having those open conversations with people.
Yeah. Yeah, really good advice. Right, we've got 5 minutes. Hindsight, what do I know now that I would do differently? I think sometimes when you teach a lesson, for myself, when you teach a lesson and they go back to their tables, and some children very early on would say, oh, well, I don't know what I'm doing. What should we be doing? Sometimes that's down to our own modelling and scaffolding. Maybe we didn't model and scaffold enough because they've gone back and they're still not sure about what to do. So really checking they understand what to do and that you have modelled and scaffolded enough, particularly in the early stages of the new thing, whatever you are teaching. The importance of pedagogy and subject knowledge together. You might have all the subject knowledge but not know how to impart that to children. That's equally a problem as having, you know, really good pedagogy but not so much subject knowledge. And then in terms of resources, if you haven't already had a chance, or you've still got a few more days in school, I'd go into that school, I'd fling open the resource cupboards and I'd be taking pictures of what you can see. Because if you know what resources are there, concrete, solid resources, then you know what you can use straight away. You know, I was telling the others how, you know, I know of teachers who've been in school years and years and years and actually don't even know the resources that are in their own schools. So don't be like that. Know what's there and know how that you can start using it. Okay, Claire.
I've already said this really earlier on, so just to reiterate, really, don't be afraid to completely change if things go wrong. Just don't keep plodding through. Change it, move it on, and it will hopefully improve what you're doing.
Thank you. Dharmini.
From my point, ask for help when you need it. Don't be afraid to seek out help through your NQT year. Simple chats with colleagues, other members of staff, support staff can be so beneficial. And just again, your additional adult can be your best ally in the classroom. That's coming from experience where in my NQT year, I had a challenging adult to work with. A lot of members of staff came to me and had already pre-warned me about that specific adult. And I started being very open with them and got them on board and have them working alongside me instead of against me, so to speak.
And James?
Nice. Yeah, I put on there the main point really about the fact that you are still a learner, even though you've gone in as a teacher. There's always the opportunity to grow more, to learn different things. So take those opportunities and outlooks. To get to know the wider school community, don't be the person who stays in their classroom for lunchtime. Get out there, see the office team, see your caretaker, get to know everybody, because you know, you're part of the big community. And to recognise that it's okay to have a tough day, because as Jean said earlier on, we always need to come back for the next day and smile fast. Something happy will get you back there.
That's great, thank you. And then this is only a reference. I'm not going to say too much about this, but if you want to know some really good research out there that really underlines what is good teaching, so you can make sure you start building some of this into a repertoire. Don't use it as a tick list and only try little bits when you can. And this is something certainly that will take you through 2 years at least, if not more. Rosenshine's Principles of Instruction, very great. And also just been released from Cambridge, the Great Teaching Toolkit. So I'd really recommend that. And I know Dharmini wants to say something about growth mindset.
I'll be really quick. We teach children about growth mindset all the time, and we're very hot on it in schools. But please, please, please treat yourself with the same mindset. We're all, including S4, we're also growing in the classrooms in our schools. And just because we can't do something just yet, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to master it somewhere along your career path.
That's great. Thank you. And we've put together a Padlet for NQTs with all kinds of different menus, and there's the reference. So when you get this PowerPoint, you can go into this Padlet and you can try out all of these different headings. Over the time, more will be added to this, and we really hope that it's going to be helpful for you. And then we've also added some useful resources. And so this is where we're going to finish. We'll probably just go over by a couple of minutes. Claire, would you like to talk through your resources?
Yes, so the first one is the one Jean referenced earlier about the statutory induction guidance. So I would highly recommend you read it. It's not a long document, but certainly worth knowing so that you're clear about what support you are entitled to and how things should be done, etc. So I definitely read that. And another couple of Dylan William clips just from YouTube that are on assessment and learning intentions. The one particularly about assessment is particularly useful at this point as we're coming in from a break from school with COVID-19. So it's just a good thing to have a quick listen to. It's not very long, and hopefully it'll just give you some ideas.
That's great. For myself, Post-its, I'm going to say Post-its and blank dice first of all. Post-its because they're great for obviously your to-do list, but also things such as activities within the classroom, sorting activities, comparing activities, making real graphs so you can stack the blocks on one another, and also for any assessment notes, things you notice in the moment really quickly. Blank dice, anything can go on them for any single subject, and you can turn anything into a game. So blank dice I really recommend. And if math subject knowledge is a weakness, or you're thinking I'm not quite sure how to teach that, the NCTM self-evaluation tools are absolutely amazing. You just fill out a short questionnaire on an area and key stage that you need, and it will send you to bits of the website that will deal with any of those development points. So maths wise, get yourself a free username and password and sign up to NCTM if you haven't done so already. And of course, other teachers, they will forever be the best resource you can ever have, other teachers. Okay, Dharmini.
I'll just put on there something really quickly, which is really interesting. It's a bit of research about ipsative assessment. And I know most of you have heard of formative and summative assessment, but if you did want to do a little bit of research in your spare time, should you have any, this is quite a good piece of research to be done. It measures the progress, so it doesn't measure children against one another or against the standard, and this can be quite useful when it comes to disadvantaged youth and pupil premium children, and it's just a good tool to try and suss out. I've also put down a few Twitter handles that I like to follow, and they're really good fun to follow on Twitter. A book that I enjoyed reading, which was really inspirational for teachers, which was The Freedom Fighters. And one tool that's helped me in so many ways for so many years is Class Dojo. So it's a behavior management tool that I've been using for many, many years. So if you do want to go and check it out, follow the link. It'll be on the slides that we'll send to everyone. And it's an online tool which will really help now, especially with COVID, once you go back into your classrooms in September, so where you can't walk around giving the children stickers, etc., etc. This will be up on your screen, and the children absolutely love it.
That's great, thank you. And then lastly, James.
Oh, yes. So ironically, I've proven my own point because I've been making notes as we've been going along in my notebook with sticky notes. So I have literally proven that as we've gone. So yeah, sticky notes and notebooks, as you've probably realised with all my answers, quite reflective. So it's nice to have opportunities to put them down, and much the same as Jean said. Twitter and Facebook groups and chats are really good. Discovering and discussing the world of education. Obviously, education goes on outside the four walls of your school. And as Claire said earlier on, we love having NQTs in our schools because we get new ideas and new research and sort of rebalance on everything that's going on in the world of education. And Twitter and other social media things can do that too. Although be aware that there can be some negativity and yeah, some whipping up of things, particularly we've seen that over COVID with various things with education. And the final one I've put there is Headspace, which is an app, an online website. It's all to do with mental health and well-being, which of course is massive in schools. It's going to be really big when we go back in September. And obviously with mental health first aiders coming in, it's a key focus. It's free for educators, and it's lots of meditation clips and clips that can help children to think about themselves and to be aware of themselves. Really, really useful, and you can use it for yourself, you can use it for your class, or as I've done, have 120 children doing it at once in a year group assembly. So it's, yeah, really useful and free for teachers.
Thank you very much. And I think, yes, that is the end.
Ta-da.
Okay, so we've only gone over by 4 minutes. We really hope that you found that really, really helpful. There's only so much you can cover in an hour. As I said, the PowerPoint, the recording of the session and some handouts, they're going to be emailed to you, so you'll have all of that. And I think really all that's left to say is to have a very restful summer. Please make sure you get your rest, and to also have a very successful first year of practice. Claire, Dharmini, James, do you want to say anything?
No, just thank you very much, and I'm sure you'll all be really successful, and good luck, and remember all the positives, don't just focus on the negatives.
Yeah, same thing. Good luck to you guys, and you'll be amazing.
Yeah, good luck. It's going to be a tricky start with all things COVID, but you guys have got it.
If you can do this, you can pretty much do anything, I would say. Thank you very much. Thank you.